Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I talked with Lani Assaf. Lani is a startup marketer living and working in New York City. Currently, she's the marketing lead at Maven, a marketplace for cohort-based courses taught by top industry experts. Previously, she was the first marketer at Alpha, a community of 100,000 plus women in tech. In this conversation, we talked about user psychology and behavioral design and first principles thinking and how to invoke all of this in your marketing efforts. We also talked about learning, education, cohort-based courses, and the drive and or motivation to learn and improve. We also talked about free will for a brief moment. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Lani Assaf.
There are a lot of bigger concepts that I've been having a lot of discussions with people on recently, which is I think for the first time in my career, especially because I'm working on the problem of learning, it's like everything is a resource. Really, I'm experiencing every conversation, everything that happens in my work, it informs my life, and everything that happens in my life informs my work. And it's there's this amazing synergy that I've felt, I think, especially in the last 6 months for the first time in my career. And I remember telling people what I felt at Maven was employee company fit. I was I've found it. It's product market fit, but for me.
This is that work-life integration concept.
Yeah. People say work-life integration, but it's more than just integration. It's actually it feels like it's the rising tide lifts all boats concept, which is the more you're synthesizing ideas from one place to the other, the better you are in all areas is kind of how it feels. Or every conversation being a resource, or every person you meet, it sort of all feeds into the central being of you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That's just a big concept.
We're going to have to pull that thread, make it a little bit more concrete, but I like where you're going.
Yeah.
Well, if you're ready to jump in, I have a question that could relate to that, perhaps.
Okay, sure. Let's jump in.
What does dancing have to do with marketing?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So my background as a dancer is sort of parallel in many ways, I think, to my journey as a marketer, actually, which is that I started dancing and I was a ballerina. So I was trained on a very particular ways to do things, stare at yourself in a mirror for 20 hours a week, down to the perfect hand positioning, this is the way, and there's only one way, and there's a right and there's a wrong. And so very top down, really, as a philosophy of dance. And if I look at the evolution of where I've gone with dance in my life and where I am now, I go to these ecstatic dance gatherings that are just about mindful movement, whatever is surging through your body, let it out, and it's the opposite in so many ways of how I previously trained to be a dancer. And it's interesting because I sort of feel there's a similar journey with marketing, which was when I was building my first business, when I was building a photography business, I was learning everything online. I was okay, I got to figure out the right way to do this. I got to figure out the right way to do this. And then going into startups and being it's not that simple. It's not just a recipe that I can necessarily follow here. And finding the flow and finding the gut level instinct and how to infuse that with the data analysis and with all the other inputs that you're synthesizing as a startup marketer. You're managing all these different disciplines and maybe all these different areas in the company because you're a marketing team of one, at least in my case. So yeah, I think that's what I've found is that there is more, to be a really good marketer, there is more gut level instinct, and it's important to continue to hone that. And that leads to, I think, much more freedom and creativity and success in the long term, similar to the approach that I've taken with dance.
Do you think it's important or necessary first to develop those frameworks or quote unquote the right way of doing things before you have that intuition and trust in yourself? Like I took salsa classes and I didn't know anything. I was like, I think early in your career, you're always looking for the right way to do things and you're very nervous about doing things the wrong way. That's how I felt. And then I got the basic steps down and I was like, oh, I could just have fun with this from here.
Yeah. Yeah. Popular knowledge would definitely say yes. You have to know the rules so you can break them. I'm not sure though, because what I do see is like, especially in the youngest generation, I have like 2 younger sisters. So I have sisters who are Gen Z, and they're not really concerned with like learning the frameworks or the ways of doing things. They're like, no, I think we're going to follow our curiosities instead and like see where that takes us. So I actually don't know. And if I'm looking at it from a dance perspective, I certainly didn't know how to be a ballerina. I didn't need to train myself like that to be able to dance and just enjoy myself to the music these days. So it's like, if anything, sometimes it was like counterproductive. So yeah, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that you necessarily, I think there are different ways to get there. I think that is the approach that I certainly followed, was like first learn the rules and read up on all the popular ways of doing things and see what all the experts say. And then figure out how you can I can infuse that into my own like version of being a really good marketer. But I think there are a lot of routes to get there, and it's not necessarily only a top-down, learn the philosophy first way. Like you can also just fail fast and start building a business when you're 14, which like plenty of people are doing that now.
So when you step into something new, like for instance, you just started working on lifecycle marketing, correct?
Yeah.
And is this new to you? Have you done lifecycle before, or?
It's totally new.
Okay. So how are you approaching this? Like what's your mental model here?
Yeah. So I think that, I follow what many people say to do, and I also find very helpful, which is I reach out to a bunch of lifecycle marketers at other companies to get a sense of like, but really, really high level, like, what is this lifecycle thing? Like, how do you think about the concept of lifecycle marketing? Because you can I was just looking at someone's site today who's a lifecycle marketer, and he was like, it's all about the in-app messages that you send at a particular time. And I was like, that doesn't quite apply to my situation. So how do I think about it at a higher level? Like, what is it really? And through the process of just talking to lifecycle marketers at different companies, what's been really helpful is people that have like gotten into this role in the last month or two. So sort of similar space where they figured out just a little bit more than me, but they're not so deep in it that they've forgotten the like real high level stuff. And yeah, making the connection that it's all about how does someone grow with your product, and how do we connect the moments in this person's life to the moments that your like product can offer, or the moments where your product can be helpful, or the service or the thing that you're building. So like in the case of Maven, thinking a lot about it, like, when do you think about learning new skills? Where do you go? And then how can Maven sort of be alongside you through the journey of helping you figure out what you want to learn, how you want to learn it, what you're going to do with it, the transformation that can occur, like all of those pieces. And so I knew I was going to be interested in it because I sort of had a sense that it was some combination of like psychology aligned with messaging, aligned with like channel strategy, and all those things I'm already interested in. And I love the holistic vision that it feels like lifecycle marketing brings, which is like, how do we connect all these things together with the customer's journey or your user's journey sort of at its core, and really like where they are in their motivations, their challenges, their life, which I love.
Right. So to back up just for a second, this is a noob question, but I'm very pedantic. What is lifecycle marketing? How would you define it?
Well, this is the best definition that I've heard from the folks I've spoken to so far that's really resonated with me, which is that lifecycle marketing is about how are you helping your users grow with your product? Like, that is it, at a super high level. And I'm letting that guide me. Like, it's interesting because I'm not being very prescriptive at all, because I'm very much so instead coming at it from the perspective of like, I've already been at Maven for, almost a year and a half. And I really understand our students. I really understand our instructors. I really understand the business. So I'm starting from like that place of being embedded in that first. And then thinking about, okay, like, how can I now, knowing what I'm learning about lifecycle, like apply things that work well in that discipline to what I already know about our business. But not the other way around, like not like throwing out all our systems to be like, well, now we need a lifecycle system. Because it's like, we already have elements of that. We're already thinking about like the light bulb moment for students. We're already like that's already imbued into the product and imbued into our marketing in different ways. So now my process is more so just thinking about, okay, what is our ideal state, knowing what I know about the business, and then sort of what's the gap from where we are today to how I can get us to that more ideal state. Yeah.
And for the surface area of the problem, like, is there anything that you can exclude from what lifecycle marketing is? Like, does it include the point at which somebody becomes a customer? Yeah. Or is it sort of like taking off from that point where you try to maybe maximize value, retention, activation metrics, like whatever those things are? Like, what surface area are you kind of looking into?
That's a great question. And this is something that I also asked the lifecycle marketers I talked to, because I was like, well, it matters how if you think about, a lot of lifecycle marketing is done via email, especially in a product like Maven, especially a lot of similar products. So if you think about how did we get this email? Like, where do these people come to us from? And that really matters, because that really helps you understand where these people are and how they found you and what they're thinking about and what their challenges are. Like, what blog post did they read before they gave you their email address? Or did they come in Maven's case, it's a marketplace, did they come in via a specific instructor? Did they come in via a waitlist for a specific course? Or did they come in via like our AI page that's like just all about leveling up in AI? Like, these things are obviously very relevant in thinking about how to design an ideal lifecycle marketing system. So where I've landed is that the discovery part is a very important part of my work. So like, the part that comes before what would maybe be activation, what would be sort of the ongoing relationship. I'm thinking about the lifecycle relationship as beginning when we get an email address into our system. That's like really when it begins. But I am currently spending like quite a bit more time thinking about the discovery piece and thinking about the matching, the interest picker, like all the things we're building on our site, and all the steps that happen before someone gives us their email address. Because I think that does matter a lot. And when you're at a startup, you can't really just be like, well, that's not my job, or like someone else can think about it, because no one else will think about it. So
Right. Otherwise, you're just kind of doing surface level things too. It's like if you were just doing CRO, but you had no understanding of where the users came from in the first place, like what the traffic sources were, you're just tweaking buttons and text. Like, you have no idea, like if they came in with this intent, or if they've come 5 or 10 times, and like check the pricing page. Like, that gives you the information you need to do the tactical layer of changes.
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. I think that holistic, I have found in my career over and over, when I've taken a holistic approach to a problem, a very first principles approach to a problem, that's where I'm really able to drive the impact. And that's where I'm really able to like see the impact I'm making on the problem I'm trying to solve. But I find it so helpful and relevant in everything I do to like zoom out.
Yeah, I'm noticing that you start at kind of the foundational layer, and it's like for lifecycle marketing, the threads that I'm pulling are the necessary ingredients would be sort of a goal, or I guess like customer and business value alignment. So like what is an ideal outcome? And that could differ based on segments or like different types of customers, but you need that in place to aim somewhere. And then 2 pieces that I heard you mention, or at least allude to, analytics. So understanding like where people came from, what their behaviors are, being able to segment different users and customers and figure out like, usage patterns or email open patterns, things like that. Yeah. And then a fundamental understanding of user psychology. So the psychology is a huge piece. Would you totally? Do you agree with those? And am I missing any factors that are kind of in that foundational layer?
No, I think those 2 are like the primary foundational layer. Yeah, for sure.
And then you sort of build up from there and have like this tactical layer where it's like, okay, we'll trigger this email message at this point, and then it becomes much more of like a behavioral design exercise.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, exactly. And you're really into behavioral design. That's something you mentioned on the forum. We talked about that in person. That's like an interest of yours.
Yeah. It's one of those things I'm trying to learn and figure out, and sort of via a combo of like actually online courses, a behavioral design course that was offered via Rational Labs, like learning, and then also on the job learning. So sort of a combo of both things to figure out how quickly I can level up in this skill that, feels highly, highly, highly relevant to everything that we do as marketers. Like,
what drove your interest in this, in behavioral science, user psychology, all of that?
Yeah, I think when I look back, I've always been interested. Like, I've always read books, like Dan Ariely's books, or James Clear's books. I don't know, maybe self-help book genre, but like, beyond that, like why we behave the way that we do as humans. Like, I just have always found it really, really, really fascinating. And I think I like someone like Seth Godin that talks about, he has a quote that's marketing is humanity, the stories we tell each other about who we are, essentially. And I like that. I've always been that sort of a marketer, which is like, it's about stories. It's about people. It's about, so I think that the behavioral design is sort of the like tech accepted way, or like products term to like infuse essentially what is that thinking into the work that we do at startups. So I find it like a very natural evolution of what I was already interested in. And I think I've just seen it be so powerful. Like, I've just seen such compelling case studies of like how this stuff works beyond anything else. And I'm big on like changes like that can make a huge impact. So I'm big on infusing behavioral design principles and sort of aligning things with natural motivations and natural moments of people, which is why like Lifecycle is also such a natural evolution for me in my career to be going into that.
Yeah. Why do we do what we do is such a fascinating question. And you're going to have to forgive me for this next question. But do you believe in free will, or are we all just a bundle of neurons and experiences and genetics that are responding to nudges and environmental factors? Do we have choice in what we do?
It's really interesting. I definitely believe in free will. And I don't really have a great why for that, other than it's just a sense, it's just an intuition, which aligns with the second thing, which is I am a person that believes in some, universal force that also exists. So something around like you're meant to experience what you're meant to experience, or when you get a no, there's a reason for that. Like, so I do think that in addition to all being kind of beings that are operating within our own free will, there's also a force that is with us as well.
Mm-hmm. But there's clearly some impact or influence on that, like choice in isolation, probably, like I feel like there's things that can influence that. For example, you work at Maven that does cohort-based courses. And I would assume that you've seen different completion rates and retention rates and all of that stuff based on if somebody does a cohort-based course or a self-guided. So yeah, there's some sense, like I bet the people who sign up for self-guided courses believe that they want to finish them. But for some reason, there's external factors that allow them, or that allow cohort-based courses to have higher completion rates.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of that has to do with the reality that we're social creatures. And I'm in a cohort-based course right now on Maven. I'm taking Matt Lerner's startup growth course, which is amazing. And I'm finding it so, like, even today we had a session at 11 a.m. and I was like, gosh, I have so many priorities and projects and I'm trying to balance all these things, but I got to show up, because I was at the last one. It's like, you see you're there in the meeting, you see everyone else who's there. It's super engaging. The instructor is live with you. And it's like, I felt some level of accountability and responsibility to like be there. And had I not had that, like if it was just a block on my calendar where I've tried this before, like calendar blocking, and I'm like, work on, course. It's like, it would never happen, because I would let the other priorities take over the morning because they felt more pressing and people are waiting on things from me in Slack and whatever. But because there was the timeliness and there was the accountability and just the reality of like, I'm going to show up and show my face just like everyone else is, I did it. And that's like, I think that is actually the really powerful force at work in cohort-based courses and other experiences that are built around community and accountability. Like, I think that's why they really, really work.
The social accountability is the big factor.
I think so. For me, in my experience, that aligns with, yes, like self-paced courses have completion rates of like 2 to 5%, cohort-based courses 80%. And so the data backs it up. And I, in my own experience, when I've tried to buy a self-paced course, even ones that I've like put a lot of money into, even ones that I've spent like $500 on, which is not that far off from a price of a cohort-based course, I've just not been able to get through it. They've been like, you have 3 months to do the material, and I just cannot. It's like,
I think it's even worse when you have an indefinite time window and you just own it, because I don't feel like there's ever like this light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm like, I'll get to it eventually. Yeah. And even worse, if it's free, like I feel like I place less value on it for some reason. Like there's a sunk cost fallacy where I'm like, I just joined a jiu-jitsu gym and I spend a lot of money on it. And I'm like, well, I better get my money's worth. I better actually go to these classes.
Yeah. It works. Exactly. Yeah. It's like Parkinson's law that work expands to fill the amount of time available for its completion. So if you have a course with an indefinite, end time that you can just do it whenever, you'll never do it.
What are some other surprising things that you've learned about learning since working at Maven?
What a question. Surprising things that I've learned about learning. It's really amazing the amount of transformation that's possible in a really short time window, like 1 to 2 weeks, when you just show up, like when you just like, it's amazing how much you can condense. Like I'm thinking about comparing it to college and thinking about like the amount of material that we would cover in a semester where just someone is droning on at you, and comparing that to more material oftentimes in like a 1-week course, but it's practical and you're doing projects and you're in breakout rooms and you're sort of like, you're having to actually apply your learnings immediately. Like someone is teaching you something and then they're like, okay, now go write your own growth model. You have 15 minutes and then you're going to present it to your peers. And like, you think like, there's no way, like I need more time to think, but you actually can get so far. It's like astounding. I just think I'm really impressed at the rate of learning that is possible for people when the constraints are there, like when the accountability is there, when the time constraint is there. And when, if you get this done today, you can bring it to a feedback session tomorrow, the AMA with the teacher, with the instructor. So that's probably, the amount of student transformation that is possible. And also just like, being in a cohort-based course now, I'm like, this is fun. Like I'm reconnected with the actual fun of learning. And I think a lot of us have like gotten out of touch with that. I used to really enjoy like watching YouTube videos and like the Khan Academy and all these like things in like high school and college when I was trying to teach myself concepts. And with a really engaging professor, you get a little bit of that. You're like, oh, this is kind of fun. Like this like math guy is kind of funny. But it's just like a next level of like, wow, learning is so cool. Like how amazing that we have this ability to just learn. And
the other thing I heard in your answer is that maybe there's an active component, or maybe action is a critical component of learning. In that you have to have the theoretical underpinnings in many cases, but if you just have that, it's maybe not as impactful as putting it into action and getting into the arena and trying it yourself. You could take a course on web design, but until you write some CSS and like actually try to build something yourself, it's all. In my experience, it's been kind of temporary. Like I kind of forget it faster.
100%. I think the like immediate application, like maybe there's some relationship here with like how much time passes between when you learn the thing and when you have to apply it. And I feel like the shorter that time window, the more likely that thing is to stick with you for longer, because that has just been my experience of like, literally, it's like 10 minutes after you learn the thing, you're building your own and you're like, well, I guess, we'll figure it out as we go here. But yeah, I have definitely found that to be true.
Have you learned anything about the core drivers of why people sign up for courses in the first place? Like what are kind of why do people want to learn?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it is something that I think I'm still in the thick of trying to figure out, which is like, I think that a lot of us get into professional careers, graduate college, startups, consultancies, doing what we're doing. And we have this idea that we're going to learn everything we need to learn on the job. And like on the job learning is going to provide all that we need. And if we like run into a problem, like maybe we'll Google it. We're obviously Googling things every day. We're like looking at maybe little videos on YouTube. We're like learning how to use a new tool. We're watching amplitudes, like, mini course thing. But I think I'm trying to figure out if there are separate segments of people, if there are sort of naturally people who just like learning and are like motivated by the idea of continuing to learn online. I do believe there's a subset of people, but I don't know if it only applies to a subset of people or if it's actually something that's buried in all of us that we've lost touch with. I want to believe the secondary option, but I'm not sure. And the reality is like, and some people have figured this out, which is that like dedicating like 10% of your time, 90% of your time still goes to your work projects and like things you need to get done and doing your work things. But if 10% of your time goes to like up-leveling yourself and teaching yourself new skills, and I found this to be extremely true for my career. We talked about this with like the CXL growth mini degree program a little bit. just 10% of your time. Like you can accelerate your career so profoundly. And I don't know yet. Yeah, I don't know I don't know how many people are in the stages of figuring this out. I don't know if this is true for everyone, because then there's also the just-in-time learning. So that's maybe like an aspirational learning, bucket, which is like people that just like to learn and are like, well, maybe one day I'll be a head of product. So let me take this like product leadership class. And then on the other side, I think there's the just-in-time learning, which I'm not sure where cohort-based courses fit into that. I'm not sure if they're actually the right solution. They might not be for a just-in-time learning concept. I think they could be when the concept is very complex. Like the AI courses on Maven are selling really, really well because people are like, I want to learn this now. Yes, let me sign up to a course now. Let me meet other people who are interested in learning this now. But the just-in-time learning is like I have a problem at work and like, I've just been tasked with writing a strategy plan and I don't know how to do it. Or like, I am being laid off and I need to find another job. And like now is a real moment for me to like figure something out. So that's the more just-in-time learning that I think there's also a bucket of learners that fall into that. So that framework of sort of aspirational just-in-time learning I've been playing around with, I came up with it and I'm like, does that apply all the time? Maybe. So yeah.
Do you think that like one or the other, like there's a greater level of satisfaction or completion? I would imagine just heuristically that most people who have like a real use case, like a real end result they want to accomplish, like that's going to have a much more like inherent drive to complete and like put that into action versus like, I just really want to explore interest and like learn how to paint or something, like, like where it's a little bit more open-ended. Like I would imagine that the former is a little bit more like focus.
For sure. I don't think, yes. And I don't think it aligns entirely with that the aspirational learning is not outcomes focused, because it very much can be. Like you can take a course on there's a course on Maven, become a 20-hour CEO, which is like work 20 hours a week and like make more than you've ever made. And that is maybe an aspirational.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's like an aspirational course maybe for someone that's currently working in a startup, but that doesn't mean there's no outcome. That doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, 3 years down the road. It's just not the just-in-time learning of I have a problem at work right now. Yeah. So I think that they can exist in both buckets. I think that outcome is really, really important in either bucket, like feeling like you got some kind of breakthrough moment, light bulb moment, transformation thing out of it. Without that, I think that's the problem with the theoretical, not project-based things. And so even like an artifact that is just a plan for how you're going to get to being a CEO in 3 years, that is an artifact. Like that is something that I think feels good coming out of a course with and feels like I got my money's worth and like, okay, now I'm going to put this into action. Even if it doesn't drive sort of outcomes immediately, it still feels like a tangible learning. I think that's the key, is like, did I get a tangible learning?
Totally. I do apologize. I'm asking you all the most esoteric, deep questions, but so I consider myself in the bucket, or I used to be, I'm kind of transitioning a little bit now that I'm running an agency and I'm trying to focus a lot more and do more just-in-time learning. But I definitely put myself in that bucket of, I just enjoy learning. In the past I learned German, Spanish, like I play guitar, like there's so many different skills and I just like picking them up. With those, I've recently tried to have no end in mind. And there's this word that I've used. It's like teleological. So it's like with an end in mind. And a friend was asking me about jiu-jitsu and she's like, what's your goal? Like, when are you going to get to the blue belt and purple belt and this and that? And I was like, hey, I'm just trying to enjoy the process.
Yeah, love that.
And same thing with playing guitar. Like, I don't really have, if I think about it, like goals or like any sort of framework or outcomes. I'm just kind of enjoying getting better and following my interests. So I don't know if this is really a question, but I'm sure you have things like that in your life. Like you mentioned that you learned a language, yeah?
Yeah, I speak Spanish and Portuguese, but nice. Spanish better.
We could switch to Spanish right now if you want.
yeah, for sure. Vamos.
But so Spanish, I'm sure, was more like it was for fun, right? Like it's not necessarily something you need for a job or like anything that's going to like have, I guess, like clear like utility in like a very utilitarian sense.
Well, interestingly, my way of learning Spanish was I actually moved to Spain when I was 16. So I was a foreign exchange student for a year as a high schooler. And that was actually, so I've always applied this to my career in life as a way of sort of what feels like a forced learning. I mean, I had no choice. I arrived in Spain. I did not speak Spanish. I was with a Spanish host family. I went to Spanish high school. I figured it out. Like 3 months in, I was understanding everything. And then 5 months in, I was totally fluent, and I've maintained the fluency to this day, mostly because it was so hard that I'm like, I'm not losing this. So I actually think the imposed accountability, I try to impose, and I've heard people say this with languages as well, which is like, if you have a reason, if your like partner's family speaks the language, or you have a trip coming up in 3 months, or you have like a real reason, you're going to learn more. I
think that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. Is separate from the love of learning. And that's also amazing and beautiful. And I have had seasons of learning, like I think I kind of approach things in seasons. So the last big season for me was improv. I did like improv 1, 2, and 3. No goal. I am not trying to be an improviser. I'm not trying to perform anywhere. It was just pure, like, this will be fun. This will be a challenge. I have to get up on stage and not know what's going to come out of my mouth and be okay with that. And there wasn't really a goal. And then now I'm like in a season of, I'm going to learn the handpan drum, which is just like this like instrument that I'm mesmerized by. No goal. But I just, am ready for like a new season of learning. So yeah, I think both.
So it still helps to apply some of those models like that you would use in a just-in-time or like a very focused sense of learning. Because I did the same thing with Spanish. Like I definitely have my end vision, like the reason I really wanted to learn it, because it gets hard. Like you go through these slogs where you're like, am I really improving? And then you look back and of course you are. But then the other thing I did was I set up inputs. So I really focused on like the showing up aspect. When I also traveled, I was spending a summer in Spain. I was in Valencia. So the immersion helped. But then I would also read for 20 minutes every day, a book in Spanish, and I would listen to a podcast episode every day in Spanish. But I had certain things that I would do during that learning curve. And I guess I also did have milestones with that European language score where it's like B1, B2, C1.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I suppose if you're serious about learning a subject, like it still helps, even if it's recreational, even if it's purely for fun, to set some of those parameters as well, just because human nature, human psychology, it's like things are going to get tough. You're going to go through a plateau. So having those in place helps you push through that plateau.
Yeah, I actually think like if you are really in love with the process of learning, giving yourself accountability goals helps you continue to love the process of learning, because it helps you not get stuck in the slog. Like it's counterintuitive, but I think similar to this philosophy of how imposing constraints on something helps you be more creative. I think the same thing is true here, like imposing gentle accountability for yourself or with, going to the gym with someone else or whatever makes you love the process that much more, and actually makes you in the long term continue to love it, like continue to love learning, continue to pick up new things that you want to learn. When you have a little bit of like, okay, let me like help nudge myself along so I don't get stuck in the slog and get so frustrated that I throw in the towel.
Yeah. Especially during the difficult phases, because I feel like with the gym analogy, it's like eventually it becomes, for me at least, a habit where I feel bad when I don't do it. But during the early days, I hated it. I had to set up systems and I would go to the gym with a friend and all of that stuff just to get through that hard part. And Spanish now, I really enjoy, like I have a couple friends who I do weekly or biweekly Spanish chats with, and it's just for fun. But like I had to go through that phase where it was actually pretty difficult to quote unquote get out of bed and like do the thing. Yeah. But now it's like kind of just for the sake of doing it that I continue practicing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I can't imagine having to have learned Spanish. I mean, if I weren't in Spain, like I don't think I would be fluent in Spanish today. It just was simply there was no choice. If I was going to communicate with anyone, I was going to learn.
Right. So to switch topics, another thing that you mentioned in the podcast intake form, kind of offhand, was this hot take. You had a hot take that most things in the world are marketing.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So to go back to the Seth Godin quote, which is how he defines marketing, and I consider him the god of marketing, so I believe in him. And he says, marketing is humanity, the stories we tell each other about who we are, ourselves, and others. I'm butchering it, but it's like along those lines. I think when you show up to a conversation, like what you decide to share, how you decide to show up, the stories you decide to tell based on who you're speaking to, who you decide to meet, how most of us operate in the world. If we believe in this definition of marketing, which I think is really important, like it is not influencing people to do things they don't want to do. It is not the sleazy advertising approach. Like that's not how I define marketing. And so I think that's really, really important to get clear is like, I'm talking about marketing is storytelling. And I think the fabric of our world is built on stories. And that is why, I mean, I've talked about it with some friends recently in the concept of the dating, like we joke about it. We're like, it's a pipeline. Like, how many qualified leads do you have? Like, but the reality is like, that is actually how people approach it. And then like, based on how they've marketed themselves on their profile, like, I'm
how do you
show
qualify your
one
leads?
way. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Like, oh, we'll start with like maybe a FaceTime call just to see if you're a right fit. Like, how is this a good prospect? Like, it's marketing. So that's why I've been like, just, putting this idea out in the world and seeing how people respond. Because I think maybe not everything is marketing, but a lot more things are marketing than we realize. And that's great. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that what's been interesting is people outside the field of marketing have reacted very negatively to that idea. And that's because I think marketing is kind of misunderstood. For people, like, modern day marketing is so different than I think what a lot of people who don't work in marketing think of marketing as. And so there's like, and I also feel a little like allergic to the idea. I'm like, ugh, is everything really marketing? Like, that sounds gross. But what if it were true,
Why does marketing get a bad rap?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, because I also have that. I grimace a little bit. I'm like, there's something like, do I want to believe that everything? Because maybe it's like, it feels a little artificial. It's like, oh, like I'm putting on kind of a mask and like I'm using that to like it kind of feels like that to me a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to have to advertise your product. You just want the product to sell itself, I guess.
Totally. Which that's also marketing, like how you strategically decide to show up, like which parts of yourself you present. It's not manipulative. It's just, I'm going to surface this piece and this part of myself in this conversation because I think this is what's going to resonate with you. Like, that sort of energy. I think that there's like a podcast, Everyone Hates Marketers, right? I know I've listened to that one a few times, and it is like it's a funny reality. I think because there's a lot of us, we're sort of an easy group of people to dislike, and it's misunderstood, and it's like seen as manipulative, and no one likes a manipulator, and it's seen as sales. It's seen as also I think sales has evolved a lot, but it's seen as like old version of sales and old versions of advertising, which is like, and also I think the consumerism of like, you don't have enough. This is what you need, to make your life better. And like marketing is constantly pushing.
Yeah, like agitating those pain points.
And what's interesting is like, I think many of us who are, or at least I'm in marketing, but like marketing for learning, like, and then previously I was like marketing for community for women in tech. So it's like, I haven't actually worked on any like product that would be like a physical product that you need in your life, but I'm really actually trying to make people's lives better through, or at least that's how I see it. So I think that's why like, the Seth Godin definition of marketing aligns so deeply with me, because it's not manipulative. It's not icky. It's actually very synergistic. Is that a word? Like, there's a lot of synergy when marketing is really working and it's really influencing the people that could most benefit from the message you have to share.
Mm-hmm. It also seems to me like sort of one of those hard truths about reality that even if you opt out of the game, you're still sort of playing the game, because at the core, everybody has desired outcomes. Everybody wants things for themselves. They want a certain lifestyle. They want a certain partner. They want to achieve certain things. And even if you say like, oh, like, I don't believe that I'm like storytelling or doing marketing, or like, no, I'm just like, it is what it is. I'm just the facts. Like, you're still playing the same game. You're just like taking a different route to getting there. Right. So I think it's just one of those truths. It's like in nature, right? Peacocks develop these like really colorful tails to do the mating dance. And it's like, there's versions of that humans do as well. Whether, it's about mating or getting a job or like whatever the kind of domain is. So I can see that it's just sort of this underlying infrastructure, and like some people are aware of it and some people are not aware of it, and some people are aware and opt out, but that doesn't change the fact that it still exists at that base layer.
I think that's why I like surfacing the idea, because I'm like, what if no one is saying this? And like, what if we just talk about it? So that's kind of why I was like, let me include this as a hot take.
I like it. It's a true hot take. If you were to argue maybe like the opposite, maybe not the opposite side, but like, you did say maybe there's some exceptions. So what exceptions would you make with regards to the most things are marketing hot take?
I think a lot of things in the human world are marketing, but I don't think things that are natural. Like, I don't think about I don't think nature would be aligned with the philosophy that everything is marketing. I think there are a lot of things that just are, and sort of those things that come up for me that just are in the natural world and just exist. Those things to me don't feel like marketing, but when humans get involved, I think that's when we make everything marketing.
What things in the natural world do you think don't apply? Just trees and plants and
mushrooms.
Mushrooms.
No, that was random. I was just like imagining the like synergy, like, there have been some documentaries and books on this, like The Secret Life of, or sort of the networks that mushrooms have with each other.
I watched that documentary.
Yeah.
And Paul Stamets talks about his mushroom trip where he like climbs up into a tree during a lightning storm. I don't know if you watched the same one, but
no, I don't know what you're talking about.
But it was quite interesting. It mostly talked about like mycelium, is that the thing? But it talked about fungus networks, right?
Exactly.
And how they're like the largest organism on Earth.
Yeah. So organisms don't feel like marketing, or like elements don't feel like marketing. I don't know, the sun, the wind. I'm not going to try to say that's marketing. It's not. Like nature is not. But I think most places where humans get involved, they're imposing marketing on things.
Where there's a conscious desire, there's a form of marketing behind it.
Yes, because it's storytelling. Marketing is storytelling, and humans come with stories. And we stories are so powerful, I think, to us as beings. And that's why we impose stories on things. We pull stories out of things. We create stories. We're operating in stories. It's like, yeah.
What do you think your superpower is as a marketer? What do you do differently than everybody else?
I think I have it comes very naturally to me to zoom way out and to think about things holistically, and to think about things from this, like we've talked about a little bit, the first principles, the student first, in Maven's case, perspective, the real wide world. And like, I spend time there and I like that. So I like working at early stage startups where, broadly speaking, I'm very much responsible for thinking about how does this fit in the business strategy, but not only that, like, how does this fit in the wider market? How does this fit in like what we're even trying to do here at all? And what is the problem we're trying to solve here at all? So like, even with email lifecycle, I'm like zooming out for a moment to be like, is email lifecycle, or is like what I've built here as an initial pitch proposal even the right way to solve the problem we're trying to solve? Is email even the right place to do it? So it's like, there's that. I have that, I can't not care about that. I think I come into any project and I care deeply about the broader perspective, and I always have that zoom out period. And then I also go super, like, just am like a super executor in terms of like going really, really deep into the details. I love like grammar and editing, like content and messaging and tiny word changes and like conversion rate optimization, like all the really small minutia details. And I love the going deep and then pulling back out, and the going deep and the pulling back out. And I think I have like a good way of that helps me stay. I think prioritization is the hardest thing at an early stage startup. And this ability like helps me stay focused on the goals and stay clear in like what I'm prioritizing and why. And also make sure that like the execution of anything that I have decided to prioritize is going to be really, really good.
How do you prioritize? Do you have mental models for that? Because I've been at early stage startups, and the thing there is like, there's less red tape, but there's so many things you could do. You could pretty much do anything, and like, it's going to have some net positive impact because you've done nothing so far. Right. So it's like in that world of like endless possibility where there's no other teams working on this. At HubSpot, there was a team working on everything, and I had to like find these like needles in the haystack for new things to do. But at a startup, you're like, I could do content, I could do SEO, I could do video, I could do this, I could do that. All these different options.
Yeah.
How do you focus?
Yeah. I love, this is the course I'm currently in, the startup growth course on Maven with Matt Lerner. So he has a program, Startup Core Strengths, and I've read his ebook that he's written cover to cover many times. And he discusses this concept of your rate limiting step. And I coordinate everything around rate limiting steps. So in terms of like, what that means is like sketching out the funnel, the general, journey that prospects are going through to ultimate end goal conversion, enrolling in a course in Maven's case. And I figure out, where is our rate limiting step? Is it activation? Is it retention? Is it acquisition? Like you can sketch out the business as it is today and understand first, I think before you even start to brainstorm projects and start to be like what you were saying, like we could launch a blog, like we could build a survey, like, just first focus on the rate limiting step and then deprioritize everything else. And anything that's not going to impact your rate limiting step, like is not a priority right now. And until I think that step of your funnel is no longer your primary rate limiting step, you should continue to focus 80% of your time on that. Like take the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your time should be focused on projects that are going to impact your rate limiting step. Yeah.
So first off, you're getting like a mental model or a landscape of how the business grows, and then mapping out different kind of nodes in the system or steps in the funnel, whatever model you create for it. And then you're finding the biggest bottleneck where the highest impact is going to occur if you create change there. Yes.
It's all about impact. Yeah.
That makes sense. So start with the problem and then add solutions, not start with the solution and try to find a problem.
Yes. Well said.
Very important. What's something that you have changed your mind about with regards to marketing, business, anything in this context?
Ooh, I think it's related to the last question, which is something I learned from Gagan, the CEO at Maven, which is a difference between how growth teams and product teams should think about things. So I'm someone who naturally, like, I love the idea that we're going to improve someone's quality of life. I love like the feel good metrics. I love, the small changes that that feel really good. And in a product perspective, if effort is low, like we talk a lot about low hanging fruit and we think a lot about effort, or people often use that when thinking about prioritization. And what I've learned at Maven is that as a product team, yes, effort matters. But as a growth team, effort is not a consideration in whether or not you should prioritize something. Like it is counterintuitive, but it is all about impact, or it feels counterintuitive at first when you learn it. Because I think a lot of the popular culture out there is like, ICE, like use this framework. And actually, when you're a growth team, impact matters so much more than effort. Like you shouldn't be doing things that are just because they're low effort. You should only be doing things that you are like really, really, really high impact. Matt Lerner also says this, that like 90% of your startup's growth is going to come from like 10% of the stuff you do. So it's going to be like the one channel that you're going to figure out, or the one thing that's going to take off. And so that approach of like, it's all about impact and running sort of rough. This was not a natural part of my process before, but if I'm going to pitch an idea, like something that we have at Maven is you do a rough impact analysis. So you actually go in and you look like, okay, this sounds like a great idea in theory, but how many people are actually visiting this page? And how many, if we were to double the conversion rate, which is already maybe hard to do, how, many more conversions would that likely actually lead to? And then you get to the end of it and you're like, oh, 5 more people. It's like so disappointing.
Yeah, like in the best case scenario, this wouldn't even matter that much. That's why I love doing models before like working with anybody on content or SEO. I'm like, look, in your best case scenario, it's going to be like 1% of your lead volume. Like, are you excited about that? Are you getting out of bed in the morning for that 1%?
It's sad.
Like, no, we
rough.
Can't even, the biggest swing we could take is still going to be a small, base hit. Do you think that effort correlates in any way to impact?
Only when there's true low-hanging fruit, which I think at most startups with smart people, there's not a ton of low-hanging fruit. Like we've done that already. So sure, like sometimes if I'm on a new project and I'm like, oh, wow, this is clearly going to be high impact and it's such low effort. How could you not have thought of that? But like, I don't think most smart startup teams really have that much of that. So in terms of maybe the other side of the question, which is like, are high impact things likely to always be high effort? Sometimes. I think there are usually ways to make them lower effort. One of the things that tied into a cultural moment at Alpha, the last startup that I was at, which is a community of 100,000 women in tech, was the Great Resignation was happening. This was like 1.5 years ago. And I was like, we should jump on this moment, but how do we do this? I'm a marketing team of 1. Like, what can I do? I came up with this idea that I wanted to create this, should I quit my job sort of quiz analysis. And it would be, we would create it as like a content piece. And then, it was gated with the email address at the end. And that was like the thinking behind it. It was literally created in a day. It was like a type form. It was just an embedded type form on our site. There was a really smart like LinkedIn strategy behind it. So we were like featured in LinkedIn news and all these things. And it ended up being not only like the highest driver of any, we had like 10,000 email addresses come through in the first week, which was huge for us, huge. And it like, if you Google, should I quit my job quiz, Alpha still ranks like number 3, like, you know, and it's like, we're a tiny site with like, so it just like hit all the markers. It was one of the most impactful activities I did. And it was not high effort. It was like a day of effort. So I don't think that it's always correlated, but sometimes it is.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. It's like there are silver bullets that are easy to do that have outsized results. And I think that's really rare. My heuristic with low-hanging fruit is that there's no competitive alpha there. So like if it's low-hanging fruit, like there's going to be a ton of other people trying to pick at it. And if it's easy for you to do, it's going to be easy for other people to do too. So I tend to look for things mapping towards impact first, obviously, and making sure that the impact sizing is high enough to be worth it. But then looking at your relative strengths and what is hard to do generally that is relatively easier for you to do. And it's still going to be hard. And that's where like you escape some of the competition. But what like doing a podcast is pretty hard, especially like consistently doing interview after interview. But there's traits about David and I who run the podcast that make it easier for us to do it. Like we're typically doing coffees like this all the time, lunches like this all the time. We enjoy asking good questions. We enjoy doing research and learning about this stuff. Whereas like for most people, it's very difficult to go, 4, 6, 8 episodes and continue on. But it's still difficult, but it's relatively easier for us to do it than other people. So I look for those things.
Totally. I love that. I'm going to write that down. That's a really good framework.
Well, it's like with the AI stuff, everybody's like, wow, it's so easy to produce content now. And it's like, yeah, it's also easier for everybody else to do it. So like, where's your competitive advantage? And maybe, it's like easy to produce 6 or 8 articles per month with AI. It might be harder to produce 200 and interweave subject matter quotes in the content itself using AI. Like if you can figure out that system, now that's, we're getting somewhere, right?
Yeah. One of the first ways that we used AI at Maven was I worked on this project with our CTO, which was to infuse AI powered recommendations. So and he built this all out. Obviously, he's a brilliant technical mind behind this. I just set up the marketing front of it. But it was immediately like we had a 3x increase in all our metrics when we sent people AI powered course recommendations for you. And that was like that's like a unique thing that like we can do, knowing what we know about someone and which wait lists they've joined and what's been their activity on the site and the courses that we have available and all the info that's like on a courses page and in a courses syllabus. Like we can match people to what they would be looking for. And so, that's like one way that we've infused AI into our work that is, I think, kind of touches on that, a unique strength of the business.
I love that. Yeah, that comes from something that innately springs from the product too. So it gives you that relative advantage. You do realize also that I'm asking you like the hardest podcast questions that I've done in a long time. So I hope you're enjoying this.
We're doing great. I'm great. I love it.
Well, if you're cool, let's switch to something easier and do some rapid fire questions.
Oh boy. Will that be easier?
Yeah, okay. Much easier. Who do you admire professionally and why?
Well, have I made it clear that I admire Seth Godin? Yes. I also admire Wes, the co-founder of Maven. So she's the reason I joined Maven to work for, she sort of hired me and brought me onto the team. I think she's one of the smartest marketers out there, Wes Ko.
I think you told me that she's the best marketer in the world.
I probably did say that. Mm-hmm. She was Seth Godin's kind of protege, like worked with Seth to launch the Alt MBA. So I think about working for Wes as like working for Seth, one step removed. So we have the grandfather and the mother. Anyway, those are two people that I really admire professionally.
If you could create your own category in Jeopardy, what would it be? And would you get every question right?
God, this is so hard because I think I'm better at like covering a lot of surface area versus like being deep in any one thing. So maybe it would have to be broad. It would have to be like like random. It would be like literally like random trivia because like I've read a lot of books all across so many different disciplines. So it would be something that I know that's a strange answer, but I think that it would be like grab bag. It would be like grab bag.
You need somebody in your team who does the miscellaneous category well.
Miscellaneous. There you go.
Which talent would you most like to have?
Well, I always wanted to be a triple threat. And unfortunately, I never could sing. So I was a dancer and I was an actress, but I couldn't sing. So unfortunately, I think I'd want that one.
It's a common answer. I say all the time, it's also my answer. So
yeah,
it would just be beautiful to sing with that angelic voice. It's hard to develop.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself more scientific or artistic?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think since the word is artistic and not creative, I would choose scientific. I've always thought of myself as a creative first. Like I was a photographer who then built a business around it, and I was a dancer. But I think I'm more of a sort of type A. So I'm more of like a scientific person broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How you described your process for figuring out new channels and new techniques, Lifecycle, also I feel like resembles almost a scientific method where you're starting with first principles, building hypotheses. It sounded a little bit like a loose version of the scientific method.
100%. Yeah. I don't love like throwing spaghetti at the wall. That does not feel very good to me.
Mm-hmm. What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Overrated virtue. That's tough. What are some common ones that people say?
Well, you got to think what's revered by society.
That's what I'm trying to think. Yeah.
Patience is a virtue.
That's important.
Politeness.
That's important too. I thought about politeness, but I was like, no, I think that actually matters.
Courage. Ambition.
Mm-hmm.
What else is a virtue? It's hard to think.
It's also interesting that these are all sort of US virtues, right? Like these are very US specific. I would say kind of American virtues.
Right.
So I think like self-reliance, I would say, is over emphasized. What was the exact word you used in your question?
What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
Overrated. Yeah. Yeah. I think like self-reliance, like do-it-yourselfness. But it's interesting because I've always prided myself on that. And then as I've gotten older, I realized the incredible power and beauty of like having actually a network of people that are looking out for you where you help each other. And I think in American society, we like extol this, like live in a suburban home with your family alone. And like, actually, that's not the best way for us to be as humans. So I would say self-reliance.
That's an interesting answer. I agree with you entirely. I only just learned how to ask for help like 2 years ago, and it's been revolutionary.
Oh, yeah. And people love to help you. And you build better relationships when you let people help you. That's been like the biggest wow moment for me.
Yeah. Life hack.
Yeah. Life hack for real. Asking for help.
What's a career choice that you considered but did not pursue?
Yeah, I considered being a full-time creative. I really considered, I had an LLC. I was running a photo business. I had a lot of clients. I didn't go into weddings, but I was like at the point of like thinking about going into weddings. And so I really thought about, do I want to run my own business? I was like 22. So this was like graduating school. Do I want to run my own LLC and do this full-time photography thing? And it was just too much. It was too overwhelming of an idea, I think. Yeah.
Do you think you would ever go back to something like that?
I think one day I will run my own business for sure. Yeah. I think that's a future path. But I don't think it will not be a creative business. It will not be photography.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, thank you so much. This conversation was awesome. I would just first off, like, is there anything that I didn't ask you that we should talk about? What am I missing?
Let me think. I don't think so.
Well, in that case,
I love what we talked about.
This was incredibly fun. We got to wrap in a free will conversation, which has been my goal since I started this podcast. It's the first time we've been able to do it. So thank you so much for that.
I don't think I had a very good answer. It's funny. I never really think about that question. So that's an interesting one.
I think about it all the time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Consciousness, free will, like what does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean? What is the self? Is the self an illusion? One of the first conversations I ever had with my co-founder, David, we had known each other for a little bit. The story that I tell is often this is the first time, and it's not true. But it was like 8 a.m. at like a HubSpot. We were at HubSpot's marketing kickoff, and it was really early in the morning, groggy, drinking coffee. And David saddles up to me on the bleachers, and he's like, "Hey, man, do you believe in free will?"
Wow.
I was like, "Oh my God, I haven't even woke up yet.
Yeah, I love that. I also love the, like, what's something you recently changed your mind on? Like, that's a question that I also often ask people to like get them thinking. And that sort of is a really good sign. Someone that like is comfortable with changing their mind. I find that as like an undervalued. If you would ask me what's an undervalued thing, I think changing your mind.
I sometimes wish I were more stubborn. I feel like I change my mind all the time. Like even within the context of SEO and content and this, like with a compelling argument, I'm like, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Totally.
All right. Is there anything that you want to promote, or where can people find you online?
I'm just Lani Assaf. LinkedIn is like my favorite social network. But I'm also on Twitter at Lani Assaf. And there's not really anything I want to promote, just the ideas that we talked about here. So I want to promote this very podcast.
Very cool. And we'll do our best to promote this. Spread it far and wide. Thank you very much.
Thank you.